Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We've gotten a number of first-person accounts of what happened on January 6th from listeners. But I want to get another one, particularly because Jenny White wrote this op-ed at thefederalist.com, which we discussed a bit, explaining why she was going to the Save America rally on January 6th in advance of actually attending, talking about the activism that has punctuated her life throughout her professional career while homeschooling. I think it was 5 children, if I'm remembering correctly. And how this, effort to voice her concerns about what transpired on November 3rd was sort of her last best bit of activism in hopes that a concerted effort by ordinary Americans can actually make a difference in how our free society operates. For more on that, what she thought going in and what she thinks coming out and what she witnessed on January 6th, pleased to be joined by Jenni White. She has a master's in biology, former education director and co-founder of Reclaiming Oklahoma Parent Empowerment, contributor to The Federalist and American Thinker as well. Jenni, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate it.
So we sort of characterize what you had intended by attending. What was the motivation for you to attend on January 6th? Tell us what you saw and what you took away.
Well, honestly, it was really an exciting place to be. We drove 20 hours. I'm from Oklahoma, so we drove 20 hours in the car to go, and we were all excited. We got there early on Tuesday morning. And, the city was kind of cordoned off. It was hard to get to our hotel room, and we were staying at the JW Marriott, which is at the corner of 14th and Pennsylvania. So we had and we were in the 10th floor, so we had a great view of everything that was going on. But it was a little disconcerting even getting there because we had to almost get permission. We had to show that we were actually staying at this hotel in order to even be able to get beyond the areas that were blocked off.
Okay, and then so then you attend the events on Wednesday, and what transpired?
Right. Actually, it was great. We got there very early. We stood for over 5 hours to wait for President Trump to speak. We were standing, literally shoulder to shoulder. You just couldn't even move. It was like being a mummy almost, and every place you turned, you could see people. Our group was standing kind of right up at the front, and you could look back and see beyond the Washington Monument, and there were just people everywhere. If there were any nefarious ideas by anybody in that group, it would have been unbelievable. You just wouldn't have been able to move. There would have been stampedes, but that wasn't what happened. We sat there very quietly, listened to the president speak. He never said anything that incited violence, never. In fact, he said peaceful rally, peaceful march several times. There was nothing. Nobody in that crowd was stirred up even a little bit. And but I'm telling you, it was free.
So after the president spoke, and then things started to break up, people going their own ways. What was that like? What happened?
Well, everybody was very orderly. They just kind of, you kind of shuffled along for a little bit until you could finally actually walk. And a great group of them headed up Pennsylvania Avenue. We actually went back to our hotel room because we were freezing cold and there weren't any facilities to use, and we were hungry. So we went up to our hotel room, and it was there that we found out. We were watching the report. We flipped on the television just to see what was going on at the Capitol, and we only had MSNBC and CNN. And so we looked at MSNBC, and we're absolutely shocked. And it was the weirdest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. We were sitting there watching the television, watching these pictures of people just wandering around in the Capitol, taking pictures in the rotunda, going back and forth between these ropes. And then at the same time, the commentator was saying, there's been violence in the Capitol, and the Capitol has been breached, and screaming and yelling. And we ran to the window to look down, thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to see something horrible. We saw nothing. We looked down, there were people in the streets looking like they'd just come from a picnic. There were people of every age, old people in wheelchairs, families with kids, dogs. I mean, it was just like a park. I mean, it was crazy. So what we were seeing on the television was not what we were seeing, just right there at the corner of 14th and Pennsylvania.
Jenny, did you go to the Capitol then to see for yourself what was going on?
We actually did. After, we warmed up a little bit, we went to the Capitol, walked up the street. It was crazy. We were kind of walking up as a lot of people were coming back, but everybody was orderly. There was nothing that even you could assume was violence. And we were even asking people on the street, hey, why are you coming back from the Capitol? And they were like, well, we need to go to the bathroom. Well, we're freezing cold. There were very few porta potties out there. There weren't any kind of trash receptacles. I mean, people just were tired and cold and were going back. So we kept walking, and we got to the Capitol. And again, there were people in the street selling Trump gear. There were people singing and street performers. It was a very kind of carnival-like atmosphere, and we just were we had no idea. So we kept walking, and we got to the stone wall that surrounds the Capitol grounds. And we stood there and looked, and we could see people in the bleachers that they put up for the inauguration, and we could see people standing around, but we saw nothing that looked violent. They were just standing around, standing in the grass, sitting on the reflecting pool, standing around it was nothing that you could possibly, it just never matched. What we saw with our own eyes never matched what they reported in the media.
So when you reached the Capitol grounds, then what kind of police presence did you encounter, and was anybody talking about? I mean, because I'm assuming that you're there at the same time that people are inside the Capitol, defacing it and so forth. All that we have seen now through the reporting. So what was the police presence, and what was the sense, even just sort of in the outer ring of the Capitol, as to what, if anything, was going on inside the Capitol?
You would have had no idea. There was no police presence. There were no people screaming and running. There was no violence. There was no turning over cars. There was nothing like what we saw during the mostly peaceful protests in the spring. Nothing like that at all. There was at one point where we did see I guess it was the D.C. police, we couldn't see, somebody throwing flashbangs, and there was some pepper spray, and we did see some people, like they were trying to disperse people from around the Capitol, and we did see some people run by us that looked like they'd gotten pepper spray. But again, we saw absolutely no indication that there was anything violent going on.
But that didn't mean it didn't happen. I mean, you guys just weren't inside the Capitol at any point in time.
Oh, no, I don't want to say that either. I'm not saying nothing happened. I'm saying what we saw was not what other people who were inside the Capitol saw. What I'm trying to explain is it was not an incident that was encompassing everybody that was there. Right. This was clearly a very small group of people who did this. It wasn't the vast majority of people that were around.
So what did you, and then did they eventually put the whole town on lockdown, and were you forced into your hotel room?
Yes, that was the other thing that was really frustrating, because she did stay in state of curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And the thing that I don't think people understand is in D.C., all of the restaurants were closed. I mean, she had closed all the restaurants. There wasn't a restaurant that was open even in our hotel. So we got back to our hotel about 4:30 or so, because there just really wasn't anything to see or do. So we went back to the hotel, and about 7:10 or so, we just noticed all these lines of police cars coming toward the hotel, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. But there were about 16 vans of police officers in full riot gear that surrounded the hotel, and we were very curious to know what was going on. Eventually, one of the people in our group went down to the lobby and found out that basically the hotel was surrounded. They wouldn't let anybody go out, even to smoke a cigarette. And like I said, there were people inside who we drove because we had a feeling that might happen, and we brought our own food with us. But we were meeting people in the hotel who were like, well, I don't even have anything to eat. There wasn't anything to eat. You could only drink water out of the tap. It was like being in a police state. And we even called. We had friends in 2 different hotels in D.C. and we called them, and their hotels were also surrounded by police and riot gear, and they couldn't go out. You couldn't even go out to smoke a cigarette, or they threatened to arrest you.
So the she is Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington,
Correct,
D.C.
the
that
mayor.
you're referring to.
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
with respect to just sort of what you saw. So you didn't see any interactions, you didn't see any protesters, you didn't see any even arguing through your entire time there, both at the speech and then when you came back from your hotel to the Capitol. So it was only by watching television and reading news reports, despite the fact that you were at the outer perimeter of the Capitol, that you understood what had happened inside the Capitol.
That's very well said. I agree completely. Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, it's just interesting because, of course, if you watch it on TV, you see, I mean, there's definitely, and the reports, I think, suggest there's a few hundred people, but I think, so that you get one perspective from an aerial view, and then if you're just a person on the ground there amid tens of thousands of other people, it's hard to know what's going on. And it's interesting that you're suggesting as you're mingling with other people, like word isn't making its way through the crowd that all that occurred at the Capitol was actually ongoing at the time.
Well, and that's an interesting point that you bring up that I hadn't even thought of until you said that. I think when we were walking toward the Capitol from our hotel room, we kind of expected people to go, "Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe it, what's going on at the," and we heard none of that. It was just, "I'm exhausted. I've been on my feet all day. I'm really cold. I need something to eat." It was nothing like that. So we were just absolutely, completely walking, going, "What is going on?" I mean, it was just so bizarre to try and reconcile what we saw on the television with what we were seeing in person.
And so then what you have seen now in terms of the reaction to what occurred and what you had hoped would be a takeaway going into January 6th versus what the takeaways are now. Just comment on that.
That's very disappointing, obviously. I mean, and it's particularly disappointing when you view it from the optics of we watched all summer and spring, people turning over cars, people hitting each other, lighting fires, ruining businesses, and none of that amounted to a hill of beans in the media, other than they were mostly peaceful protests. We could just understand that. This group was a completely hundreds of thousands. It had to have been people. I mean, you couldn't have been that packed in that big of an area and look out and see nothing but a sea of heads, for it to be that. And there was nothing like that happened. And yet suddenly now we're the problem. It is absolutely probably the most scary, frankly, beyond frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. It's just scary how you can demonize a set of people for some actions that were taken. And I've been looking at a lot of video because we did a lot of debriefing on a 20-hour ride back home in the car, looking at videos, reading what people were saying. And what people are saying just doesn't, what we're seeing in videos and hearing from other people just doesn't match up to the media narrative. I mean, this isn't what people like us do. I mean, we went as the Tea Party, we went to Washington, D.C., hundreds of thousands of us again, and we left the mall cleaner than it was when we got there. I mean, that was reported in several media outlets at the time, and now this group is being accused of being, instigators of a riot. It doesn't make any sense. You have to look historically, and historically, that's not what this group of people who went to see President Trump speak on the 6th. That's not the way these people act. I do believe there were bad actors that kind of forced the hand of this. I'm not saying that everybody that supports President Trump, you always have outliers, but I'm saying the vast majority of us are good people who just wanted to redress our government like our Constitution allows us to do.
Jenni White, she has a master's in biology. She's former education director and co-founder of Reclaiming Oklahoma Parent Empowerment, and a contributor to the Federalist and American Thinker. Jenni, thanks for joining us and sharing your perspectives. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan and Amy, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jenni. And also, Dan, those 3 people that died from medical emergency